My name is Christian Hidaka. I'm an artist based in London. I make murals in my exhibitions and I hang paintings amongst the murals, and it's really one of my joys to make these types of exhibitions, to immerse the viewer in a world which is unfamiliar to them. Making murals, obviously it's always very time consuming in terms of installation. We don't have so many pre-made artworks which we just install. This exhibition, a 12-month duration, which is really unusual and a real luxury at the same time. So I wanted to come up with something more than I might normally do. I've always wanted a space where I can go deeper into this idea of mural painting. So I wanted to do something very figurative with the caves. And the space itself is in a basement level. I wanted to explore maybe hypothetically what's on the other side of the walls. So there's this fictitious subterranean world. And beyond that, I really want to invent a whole new genre of painting, which in this case is to make it underground sanstuhua. So this genre doesn't exist, and I wanted to really push this idea of what can I do something new, and also the scale, the ambition within this really beautiful space, which has very high walls. So I was able to make these very impactful murals for them. Waiting in Godo, I began sketches for this work in 2020. So I'd visited there that summer and I came back, I started making sketches, and I felt, okay, there's something I can do here. I'm going to use Eastern oblique perspective, sort of remake this scene using that Eastern idea of space, because it's very geometrical and it worked with bird's eye view type of space. But I needed a figure for it. So then I started referencing this figure I painted in the past, which was loosely based on a self-portrait by Van Gogh. I suppose on the one hand, it is a self-portrait, relates to a former painting I made into which was a self-portrait, wearing this outfit, carrying this ladder. But at the same time, I'm using this blend of Eastern, Western space. The Eastern space never used shadow, Western space was never oblique, it was always perspective, and there was an assumption that shadow only exists with perspective, like it does in photography. I'd like to use the idea that we can separate them and put Eastern space with shadow, so we have a new type of space. This painting is an embodiment of that dream to make this Eurasian space. Identity is quite sort of provisional. I grew up in the UK during the 80s, having been born in Japan and lived in Hong Kong. I always felt very sort of dislocated from both cultures. My father's English, my mother's Japanese. Looking at painting from the past, painters tend to paint their habitat. Cézanne in Aix-en-Provence or Constable in his village in Dedham in Suffolk. I used to paint landscape and I didn't have something like that I could feel really attached to. So I was in this position of sort of, well, maybe I need to invent a space. So painting really became very much about constructing what I call a pictorial identity. So that identity is formed through constructing images using sort of elements of Eastern space, Western modes of chiaroscuro and things like that. This idea, what I stumbled on, putting the shadow with the Eastern space, the sort of superstructure of Eastern space, it became really interesting because then I found, okay, within that space I can behave differently compared to just working with perspective or photography. I was able to use transtemporal motifs. So I can use something from the 16th century alongside something from the 20th century very easily. It's very strange what began to happen when I changed the space. So as well as being transcultural, I would say it's transtemporal, anachronistic. I mean, they're these sort of overlaying time zones which I enjoy with the simultaneous appearance of a painting. What is a handmade image? And what is the potential of a handmade image today? When we have all this technology, for example, a photograph can take a trace of the world, of what appears in front, and painting, you construct everything, from the color structure to the narrative, to the relationships, the sight lines. At the same time, it could be completely arbitrary what you do in it. For me, there's something that pulls me back to painting. There's something very mysterious about it, because when you're making a painting, ultimately what you're doing is listening to some inherent logic which comes about as a result of a set of motifs you start with a few things, but then you have to start thinking, well, how are they going to interact? You don't have a clear narrative exactly what this thing is about, but visually, how do you make them interact? What makes sense? And that's not so easy to put into words or to pre-plan. That's just to do with sitting and watching and listening. It's just an endless, fascinating process. We're image animals. We consume images, like it's infinite now, since digital photography was made, beyond necessary means. Painting has always got its speed. There's a sort of regulatory power within painting that it cannot do a lot, and that's its power, its limitations. So for me, there's a lot more truth to it because it has to work within those margins, and it's always having to resist the world around it because the world is moving very quickly and things come and go. But painting is a sort of dimension which is working at a much slower level of speed. It takes time to make a painting. That journey, you can compact so much more information, which is not necessarily useful information, but it's information which is not easily quantifiable. And that's where the artwork becomes interesting. This is a personal analogy I have with the waterfall, this act of creativity and a source, and it keeps coming and the water's flowing through. And at the front, I've put these steps so the viewer metaphorically can sort of clamber into this water. I wanted to make a larger scene by creating this assemblage with the attendant who sits on a bench. I took a photograph of this guy who looked like he was meditating or dozing in the corner of this very busy tourist site. And I love the idea of displacing him temporarily into Seoul now today as a literal steward of the gallery. You'll have your own stewards here, but we have this, the illusion of a steward, an attendant who's looking after the cave. And he's very inward, his eyes are closed. So we have this sort of subterranean, subconscious world as well. And I've shifted the perspective with this arch. It doesn't follow the perspective cycle, so it flips. So you see the right-hand side of the arch here, and then it flips to the left-hand side. So there's this strange spatial flip that happens as the viewer turns. In the deepest recesses of a cave, I wanted to circumvent that temporal distance, bring the stars back into the cave as the ultimate destination. We can go into the caves and almost travel deeper into the cosmos, metaphorically. The motif of the star also repeats because of the clocks with the sun, and in the middle of the space we have what appears to be a sun, but there's a black hole, and I sort of flipped this again with the idea of Hawking radiation emanating from this black hole. I thought that'd be interesting between the two cave openings, which are circular as well. It has a similar diameter to both of the cave paintings. The title of the painting is Stage Serpientiae, and this is a portmanteau of two words of serpents and also sapientiae, which is the Latin for wisdom. And there's something about the old world, and the presence of snakes was much more connected to wisdom and being a sort of guardian of the underworld. I think this motif, obviously connects to the theme of the cave. In Christianity, the symbol of the serpent was flipped from the old world. It became taboo, as if the snake is feeding the musician with some sort of music, sort of composition. And there are many references within the painting, especially towards a painting by Nicolas Poussin called The Music of Time, Dance to the Music of Time. The figure of time is on the right-hand side, and he's playing a harp, and I've taken the same pose here for the flutist. Sort of invoking billions and trillions of stars. They're all falling down the sides, and I've used this Arabic Islamic pattern. I like to put the mashrabiyah down the sides of the painting, which casts shadows over the figures, using these different pictorial forms alongside each other. So this was the first work I wanted to include in the exhibition. And so in this sort of thing in the middle, he invented this fountain, and on the fountain there was a bull hovering, so the bull was suspended, and I think there's some alchemical symbolism in that. I was fascinated by this engraving, which is of a grotto, and extended to the space. I wanted to create this idea of a grotto in the 21st century using Sanshui with the mountain water painting. Outside of this, we have a frame of sort of Carlos Scarpa-inspired multi-frame. I love the idea of painting this sort of abstract constructivist painting, but then punching it through with this sort sort of picture within a picture. So the viewer's relationship to it is very much, so this is at head height, and it's really a painting made of frames. And with each frame you have a different world. I hope, for the kids it doesn't have to necessarily be a fun thing to explore, but that it leaves an impression of what an image can do and to pick up on the atmosphere of it, to explore it. And I think really for visitors, I would love if people can just suspend their preconception and open themselves, trying to understand what might be going on or not going on. I think museums are really important places for people's mental well-being, because the mind has to exercise itself, its imagination, not in a way that we need to make our lives more linear and do more and so on. It's where we can suspend the functioning of our minds. Painting is another means to dream, and I think the viewer can participate and enjoy this sense of dreaming and creating images.